Awesome. Thanks for joining, everyone. I'm Rachel Hart. I'm the designer at DSGA. And as you might have heard, of course, if you're at this webinar, you probably have, we're working on a design refresh for our GovHub websites. So I'll just be going into some details about what that is going to involve. So starting off, I'll show some mapping directly from our current front-end theme, which we call Forest, and how that translates into the new theme we're calling Bloom. Get into some details about all the little pieces that are affected with this design change, go into some of the updates with the editor experience and things that you all should be aware of as you're working on your websites, and then covering it just at a high level what our rollout plan is going to look like. So if you were at Jasmine's webinar about a month ago, you already got some introduction to this. This is just going to be diving in a bit deeper to what some of those changes are. And yeah, there will be a recording of this webinar. If you have any questions throughout while I'm talking, please send those in using the Q&A box. You should see that at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to get to everything. Keeping it all in there as opposed to putting it in the chat is just going to help us make sure that we're seeing all the questions. So starting off with the mapping, I'll show you some sort of before and afters. So at a high level, just so you know what's coming, we're going to be looking at this page, scrolling down from the top. So starting at the top, this is what the page would look like. This is a landing page on in the Forest theme in our current site. So we've got a hero, a couple of promos, some icon links. And so then how that translates into the updated design, this is what that would look like in Bloom. So for this sort of thing, it's a very straightforward transition from one to the next. I'll flip back and forth here a couple of times so you can see what that change looks like. So you can see just some slightly updated styles to the hero. Promos overall are pretty similar. Icon links are just a slight adjustment to their layout. So you can see what that looks like. Scrolling lower on the page, then this is back in the Forest theme, the current one. So we've got a section title, some introduction text to the content in this section. Maybe that's using a promo, a couple other promos next to it with images and links. And then at the bottom here is a link associated with the section as a whole. So how that might translate directly into Bloom. Overall, again, pretty straightforward. All the same content here, no other changes. Really the main difference that you might notice in this translation is with that section link. In the update, that moves up to the top right next to the section title. And then if we take this just a step further, so what we're looking at right here is just, if we flip that switch, this is how it changes. But then with the updated theme, we do get some additional styling options and different ways that you can lay things out. And I'll go into more detail later of how this comes together. But this is a new option here. So we can have all of that section level introduction information here on the left, and then with the more specific blocks to the right. And this is a new option that you're getting with Bloom that I think can really be useful for sort of elevating your design and taking it to the next level. There's nothing wrong with this version if you were just to do the straight switch and not worry about it, but we did want to make sure that we introduce some new options and get you the best layouts that you can. Then at the bottom of the page, we have here in the Forest theme, a news teaser, another promo, and then what we're calling now the spotlight. And so then how that translates into Bloom, just a direct switch. Here's the update. This is maybe not an ideal layout for this content. And so then here's another sort of example where you might take another look and just see how you can rearrange some of that, get it a little bit cleaner. And we'll continue doing more training on how to make these sort of decisions and update your site to use the new designs as best as possible. So with all of that, that's how we go from this page in the current theme into a straight switch into Bloom. This is going to require little to no effort on your part or our part just to get this switched over. And then with a little bit of additional tweaks, looking at how we can best use the new theme, end up with this. So that's a high level view. I'll show you now what some of the color palettes look like. I include several examples here. It doesn't include quite all of the palettes, but it should cover at least most of y'all's websites who are on this call. So the Stars and Stripes palette, this is what we've been looking at. This is one of our most popular, if not the most popular palette that we have across GovHub sites. And this really uses that dark blue. It brings in a red accent as well as a gold accent, and then just some neutral grays. So this is the color palette that you'll see on sites like the governor's website, the Office of Planning and Budget, Bureau of Investigation, and Public Health. So that into this, of course, these are the same examples that we've been looking at, but now we're just focusing on the colors here and how they translate. So you can see we're keeping in a dark blue, keeping in a neutral gray, just sort of warming it up a little bit. We still have that red accent. So it's a pretty straightforward transition there. None of this, I think, should be all too surprising looking from forest into bloom. It's just kind of to give you an idea of what that translation is going to look like. So then next up, I have the simple State House palette. This is used on Department of Revenue, State ADA Coordinator's Office, and the State Accounting Office. It's very similar to Stars and Stripes, the last one that we were just looking at. It just gets rid of the red and introduces this light green. And so how that translates into the bloom theme, you can see we're keeping the dark blue and the light green, the gold accents. It's all very similar, just kind of refreshing that and getting everything on a sort of cohesive scale of colors. The foundation, so the primary website that you'll see this on is georgia.gov, but this palette is available to other GovHub sites. And this is probably one of our friendliest themes. It has a lot of greens and peaches and just very friendly, welcoming colors. And so what that looks like in bloom, keeping all the same sort of basic ideas, just updating some exact colors. Atlantic Wave, this is what you'll see on Department of Community Health and their associated websites, Medicaid, State Health Benefit Plan. And this is our bluest palette. An adjusted blue from what you'll see in a couple of the others. It's a little bit less official and it brings in a slightly greener tone to the blues. And so you'll see that sort of slightly greenish tone on the blues translate now into the updated version of that. And then this is the last one that I'll show. This is the state park theme. This is what is used on the EPD website, Environmental Protection Division. And so very green with some gold accents and bringing in what that looks like now in the updated theme. I think I saw someone raising your hand. If you have any questions, please stick those in the Q&A and we'll make sure to get to those at the end. So now everything that we've been looking at so far is just landing pages, just like what you would see for your homepage. And of course, the design updates are affecting more than just your homepage. It's across your entire website. And so, for example, and now this is where you're going to start seeing photos of my pets. The cat is Lyric, the dog is Fennec. That'll come in handy as we go through the examples. But so this is a landing page that includes the side navigation. This is an option that we have currently, but I'm not sure if everyone is aware of. If you have a landing page, maybe deeper in your site navigation, or even if it's just like one of these top items across in the main menu, but it's not your home page, it can be handy to have your side navigation turned on. And so with that, you can still have all the flexibility of a landing page, but just make sure that you're sort of presenting where it is in the site structure and including links to all the child pages and all that sort of stuff. So up at the top of this page, we have the big hero again, but then if we scroll down, we keep all of the flexibility of the landing page next to the side navigation. So I really like this option for introducing large sections of content outside of your homepage. It's a good way to just sort of ground it all while keeping, again, that flexibility and the ability to include all these different block types and customizing the layout and all that sort of stuff. Now, another page type that we have is the how do I. There are a few different display options for this. You can have the numbered steps, which is what I'm showing you here. You can also just have bulleted steps or a checklist or accordions. And so this is just showing the numbered step. This is the most commonly used version of this page. And nothing really is wildly changing here. I just want to give you an idea of what this looks like with the updated numbers, but you can still have bulleted lists inside of these steps. You can still embed things like the accordions down here. So just an updated refresh style to what these pages look like. And then a news page. So very straightforward, just this is a text heavy page. You can include images, you can include embeds. If we scroll down to the bottom of this page, you can attribute an author. And then this last box here that I want to point out, this is another feature that is available on any of your sites. If you are interested in adding that, just let us know. You can open up a support request. But this is a quick form that will show up across almost all of the pages on your site to just ask users, did they find what they were looking for here? They can answer yes or no. If they answer no, then it'll ask for a follow-up question. But this can be a good way to get some live feedback from your users. So looking at responsive designs, we of course want to make sure that everything that we're doing always works well across any device. So whether you're on desktop or an Arrow or tablet or on your phone, this is how that would translate. So you can see the navigation collapsing into the hamburger menu, everything just kind of tightening up a bit, restacking, and then what that looks like on phone, the most condensed version. So that side navigation now turns into this little hamburger menu here, and everything just stacks on top of each other. And what that looks like on a more text-heavy page, just a quick look there. Another item to point out here is with the breadcrumbs. We're sort of simplifying how that works on smaller screens. So on a wider screen, you'll see the full like path list of how you get to this page, all the way from the home page to the main nav page to its parent page and then the page that you're on. Whereas once we're on smaller screens and there's not as much room for that sort of thing, then we simplify that to just show the direct parent page to where you are. All right, so then getting into all of these specific little updates, a few things that I wanted to point out. So starting with the typography, this is something that you might have noticed as we're looking at the back and forth of forest to bloom. So forest on the left, bloom on the right. There are a few things going on here. So first off, the use of what we're using for our primary body copy here. So whether that's the body of a page or maybe the description text on a promo, anywhere that's really text heavy, we are updating that from using the serif font to using the sans serif font. This was just something that we thought was nice for the refresh. We thought it would give it sort of a fresh look. And something that we've gotten feedback on from you all that you wanted to see more of that sans serif font. So that's something that we're bringing in with this update. And then a note on that sans serif font, we are actually updating what the typeface is. So in Forest, currently we're using a typeface called Proxima Nova, and that is a paid font. We have a license for it to use on GovHub websites, but the problem with that is it's been difficult when someone asks us for, hey, what are your fonts? We want to use them on our application or on other materials. And we can't give that to you. Our license is just for GovHub. And so in this update, we wanted to use that as an opportunity to change what we're using there and use a free font instead. So the new one is called Montserrat, and that is a free Google font. Anyone can access that online. So that should make things a lot easier for if you wanted to update your applications or anything to fit in line with your website. then you can now use that font and not have to worry about paying for it. And then the last thing I want to point out here is the way that we're styling our headings. So this is where we're keeping that serif font, and just in shorter chunks, just to add some difference, some visual interest between the headings and the body copy. But the difference here, of course, is in Bloom, it's a slightly smaller size. That's something that we've gotten a lot of feedback on over the years, that our current headings are just very large. And I mean, I will say, like, super large headings when we designed this update was very trendy, but it's maybe more appropriate for something like a marketing website, whereas on our government text heavy websites, something a little bit smaller is probably going to make more sense here. So reducing the size, but then increasing the weight, making it more bold so that those headings still stand out and they still break up your page and do the job that they're trying to do. So, okay, I'm going to get into some specifics with the header and main navigation. There are, of course, some obvious differences here in the way that we're using color. But then some things that are maybe less obvious with the main navigation here. We are starting from a new, fresh point. So the main navigation, getting it to be accessible. Of course, accessibility is something that we always care about, and we are always trying to make our sites as accessible as possible. But navigation is one of those things that under the hood is a little bit trickier than you might think. And so we're using this as an opportunity to really start fresh with how we're handling that navigation, how it's being built, and how like keyboard navigation is used and all the different pieces that go into it. And so we are starting from an existing accessible menu that we got from developers outside of this project. They had already created it with accessibility at like the top of their mind. Like that was one of the most important things when they were putting together that navigation. So we can use that as a starting point and then just apply our updated styles to it. So any concerns about accessibility for the main navigation should be taken care of here. Another thing with the navigation is how we are handling especially wide menus. So whether that means that you have long text for your menu items, or if you have lots of menu items, then even at wider screens, it's going to collapse into this hamburger menu. And so that's just a way that we can help that stay tidy. It takes care of some development concerns that we had when putting it together. So just something to be aware of. If you do have an especially long menu on your website, then you might see it in that hamburger menu, even at a wider size. It's a very common pattern across websites. We're not really concerned about making it usable. Like people are used to seeing that hamburger menu at this point and clicking on it to expand and see what the full menu is. But of course, do still keep in mind, you want to keep your options limited and short text even still, just to make it easier for people to navigate through. And then the last thing I want to point out here with the mobile menu, or anytime that it collapses into hamburger menu, the way that we have it in Forest right now is that the search bar is always exposed underneath the header area. And we know now that, of course, everyone uses Google, but once they get to your site, it's a lot less common for someone to use the in-site search. And so we're still keeping the in-site search. We still want to make that an option, but once it collapses into the smaller screen, then that search is actually going to be inside of the hamburger menu. So it's not taking up that space at the top of your screen. So next I want to talk about alerts. This is something that we're all probably pretty familiar with. These big banners across the top of your site. So when we designed this a few years ago, we wanted to make sure that it was big and obvious and didn't get missed. But the way that we've seen it used since putting it out is that it tends to just take up too much space on the screen. It's too big, and especially if you have multiple alerts on one screen, then they stack on top of each other and it just becomes a lot before you actually get to the page content. And so in this update, the biggest change that we're making to that is really just bringing in the size, just condensing it all into as small as we can while still making sure that it's noticeable. So this is something that we tested with end users, and we know that they're still seeing the alerts, they're still noticing it, but they're able to more quickly get to the page content and try to complete the task that they came for. And this is something that is especially impactful, this as well as the other changes that I already talked about on mobile when we put that all together. So you can see on the left in Forest, if you have a couple of alerts on your page, then that can really take up pretty much all of the top of your mobile screen. So when you first load this page, you don't even see the page title. It's all covered up by all the stuff that's static across every page of your website. And so with this update, we're able to really condense that and bring up the important content so that when you first load the page, you immediately know where you are and you can start getting into the task that you're here for. Teaser links. So this applies to calls to action, as well as, like news teasers, bio teasers, any of the things that are just like short little blocks of information that link off to somewhere else. So we are updating what is clickable within these teasers. On the left, you can see as my cursor is going over top of the different items, the only thing that is clickable is that button at the bottom. And we know from looking at click maps as well as just common patterns that people have posted online, we know that people are trying to click on the headers and on the images. And currently that doesn't do anything for them. So that can just give them a moment of frustration when they're clicking on this thing and it doesn't do what they're expecting it to do. So then in the update, what we are addressing that by making those items clickable, making the header and the image actually be links, and they're going to link to the same thing as the button at the bottom. It doesn't change the style initially when you're just looking at it, but when you hover over that, it does have a hover effect so that it confirms that this is something that you can interact with. So that was something that we thought would just be really helpful for users. That doesn't really impact the visual display of the site, but it does have that little benefit there. WYSIWYG embeds. So this is if you're on a news page or on a topic page or anywhere else where you have that edit box that you can embed other content into. So right now, you have 3 options for how you can align that embed within the rest of the content. You can make it full width, align to the left, or align to the right. Full width, currently, it's really separated from the rest of the content. So it has these accent lines, it has these accent lines on the top and the bottom of the embed, as well as some extra space around it. And the idea of that was to just like help it stand out from the rest of the body content and break up the flow. But since putting that out, we've realized that the ways that people are using this sometimes, you don't really want it to stand out separate from the rest of the content. Sometimes it makes more sense just to include it. And the reason that you're embedding something here is maybe for the fact of it being reusable. Maybe you have a list of links, or you have a promo or some text that you want to include on this page and on other pages. And so you're using that reusable content and you want it to just kind of flow in with the rest of the page. But by having these extra accent lines, it really sets it apart and can create some awkward divisions. So with the update for full width embeds, we're getting rid of those lines. So now there's just a little bit of extra space on top and bottom, but all in all, it flows in with the rest of the text. Now, if you do still want it to stand out, then when you embed it to the left or to the right, it still has some additional styling on there so that it stands out a little bit. You can have, if you have no image, then it'll show this accent line on top and it'll give it a slight drop down or drop shadow behind that area. So it still stands out a little bit and you still have that option. Some other things to note with the update here for the left and right alignment of embeds. So the way that we have it currently in Forest, they are different between the left and the right. So the left is a bit narrower, the right is a bit wider. And then also the way that we're doing it now, because the left is narrow, then it never shows images on the left side. And so we did that at the time thinking this would be a nice way to provide different options and maybe use the screen space in a different way. But since having that, we've seen that it really just kind of creates more confusion for editors. It can be unclear when you're embedding on one side versus the other, like, why does this look different if I do it over here versus over here? And so we're really just cleaning that up and just keeping it all very straight and clean, and everything is equal between the left and the right. All right, so then changes to the editor experience. There's, like I said, not a ton of stuff that you necessarily need to know, but a few things that I just wanted to point out. Starting with the hero. So the way that this works right now is that just like any other micro content or teaser, you would go to a landing page, add a block, and then out of the list on the right, you'd choose hero. And that can go anywhere on the page. It can be at the top, it can be in the middle of the page, it could be full width, or it could even be a third of the width. Like there's a lot of flexibility in how that can be used currently, which is actually not what a hero by definition is supposed to be. A hero is where it has a large image and big text, and it's at the top of the page to introduce the page. So it's sort of like almost a splash page. Like when you first load this is what you see. And so in this update, rather than it being a separate block that you place, then on the landing page itself, we're moving all of those hero settings. So I'll let us scroll back up to the top here in a second. We have that top of page display radio selection there. And so you can choose to show nothing, or you can choose to use the hero. And if you do want to use the hero, then that's where it adds in all of these hero specific fields. So giving it a title, a description, a link, an image, you put all of that here on the landing page edit form. And then that's how you get something like this. And so there are multiple benefits to doing it this way. Not only do we have more control over where it goes and how it displays, it also lets us use that top heading as the actual technical heading level 1 for this page. So that's an accessibility benefit. We do still have a couple of different display options here, just like we do currently. So I'll just flip back and forth again so you can see what those different options look like. And then by having it part of the landing page structure, that's how we are able to have it show up above the side navigation if you have that turned on. So the way that it is currently, with placing a block in the layout, then it has to be down here with the rest of the layout content right next to the side navigation. And now we can have it display more as a true hero and actually show up at the top of the page. Featured intro. So this is something that I mentioned earlier that I would be getting back to, but I'll go into a little bit more detail now. So this is looking at the layout options for sections on a landing page. So currently, these options here on the right side, when you're laying out a landing page, you have one column. You can make it a full width column. You can make it 2 columns in a couple different displays, or you can make it 3 columns side by side. So we're adding this new option, featured intro, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second. But say you click on that, then you get your configure section settings. So here's where you would add the section title, section description, which is going to be a new field. And then you can also choose your background colors. And there are a few differences to the colors that we're offering here as background options. But one thing that I want to point out is with the automatic background. In most cases, the automatic background is just going to be white, pretty straightforward. But if you pair the automatic background with the featured intro layout, then that's how you get something like this. So the layout itself is referring to this content over on the left, and then these blocks on the right. So on the left here, this is actually the section introduction content. So this is the section title, the section description, the section link. These are all fields on that section configuration setting itself. And then over here on the right is where you can place the blocks. And we'll have training about how best to use this type of layout. For example, I would recommend keeping these blocks over on the right side pretty consistent with each other. If you have an image on one, then you should probably include an image on all of them. That's just going to be one way that you can keep this sort of layout looking really neat and tidy. But we'll have all of that written out in our knowledge base. But then the background color, specifically, the automatic background color that I was talking about, that's where we get this split color down the middle that you see here. So it's a little bit, it's a light neutral color to the left and then white on the right. This is not necessary to have with this layout. You can override that and have just a full background color. But we thought this was a nice option to provide that can help break up the page a little bit differently and give some overlapping and some dimension that we thought would keep things interesting. And so this is just how this looks on a full page. So with the section above, the section below, and then how that fits right in there. Tile sets, and this will be the last piece that I talk about here. So this is a tile set in Forest. And right now we have 3 different layouts that you can use for your tiles. You can have image plus text, image only, or icon plus text. And all of these can be mixed and matched. So the thinking when we made that happen was maybe you want to include some things with an image, but maybe others, you don't have a photo, so you want to use an icon. So we allowed that flexibility there. But the way that we've seen it used, that's not actually how people are typically doing it. For the most part, it's one type per set. I think I've seen only maybe 1 or 2 instances where there's any sort of mixing within a single set. And by making it possible for them to be mixed, that limited how we could design these different components. We needed to make sure that they all worked together. But if we separate them and make it so that only image plus text can be used in one set and only image by itself can be used in another set, and you're not able to mix and match those, that gives us more flexibility in terms of how we can design those. So one big benefit that I see out of this, the text here on the bottom of the image plus text tile, the way that it's built currently, that text actually overlaps the image. And that's just what we had to do for it to be able to work with the other types of tiles. And with this update, the text actually sits below the image, and that text space will grow as needed depending on the content that you have there, but it's always going to be below the image. So the crop of this image is never going to change no matter what content you have there or what your screen width is. It's always going to be that exact crop. So that gives you a little bit more control over what that image is going to look like on your page. And then icon, we're actually removing that option from tiles. But of course, you still have icon lists that you can use to include links with icons. And then any block, for the most part, you can give an icon at the top. So we still are keeping that option for icons. We're just removing it from the tile set because it felt a bit redundant. All right, so then rollout. This should all be pretty similar to what Jasmine covered about a month ago. But just a reminder what this refresh is, it's all just visual. It's updating what things look like. And making this happen is going to be a short engagement to plan when your design will take effect and clean things up. This is in addition to making things look fresh and new and more modern, we're also cleaning up unnecessary code and helping editor options, just simplifying some things in terms of how you're building your sites. What this is not, it's not a full migration of your site's data and content. This is not going to be a big project like it was a few years ago when we updated into GovHub. This is really just taking the content and the site that you already have and just kind of flipping a switch, making a couple tweaks as necessary to make sure that everything looks good. And so it's not going to be any sort of lengthy undertaking, and this is not going to be any sort of complete change to how you create and edit your content. It's really just small changes here and there. And then just to give you an idea of timeline, we're going to start deploying rounds in May. So similar to how we did it a few years ago, we are going to be doing the update in rounds. So it'll be a handful of sites at a time, going through, just making sure everything looks good and giving it the thumbs up and making that live. So it'll be over the course of a few months, getting through all of the sites to make sure that everything is updated. We will be announcing the schedule for this next month, and we'll work with you if there are any conflicts with that. And as we update the theme on your site, we'll just take a look at the homepage and any key landing pages to make sure everything looks good. And like I said, we'll of course be holding training sessions and updating our knowledge base to make sure that everyone knows how to use the new theme. So that is everything that I have. Chelsea, did we get any questions? You're muted.
Oh, yes, sorry. We have several. So I will go through these and if more come in, we'll continue to answer them as they come. All right, so going back to the beginning, Rachel, someone asked, can icon links be even more minimal? I think they were referring to the here's a fish link.
Let me see if I can find what exactly that's talking about. Okay, let me share my screen again. Okay, so this here, is that what we're talking about? Oh, sorry.
Possibly, yes, probably.
Okay, I mean, this is, it's pretty minimal as is, I would say. It's already, like, if you're adding an icon to a link, then part of the reason that you're doing that is you want it to kind of stand out and be quickly recognizable. And so I would say, like, there's not going to be multiple options. I'll just say for icon links. If that's what you choose to show, then this is how it's going to show up. And we're working on making sure that it always works across all screen sizes and all like placements and all that sort of stuff to get that working as well as possible.
All right, thank you. Okay, so the next one is about image use. Can we use images from Google Images? I figured you'd have some ideas or thoughts around this.
Yeah, so let me, I thought I had it somewhere. Okay, well, so for images, of course, whenever possible, we recommend using your own photos. If that is something that you're able to get at a high quality, then it's always going to be best to actually take photos of people using your services, or depending on what it is, the service itself. But of course, we know that that's not always possible. And so if you need to use stock imagery, that can be a viable option. Just make sure that you're looking for good high quality images, things that don't look too stocky. So like, you don't want a lot of people like shaking hands and looking at the camera and all that sort of stuff. We have some guidance around picking good imagery on our design system website, orchard.georgia.gov. So that gives an idea of how to find some good images there. We do also have a library of some stock imagery that we've pulled previously. And so if you're interested in getting access to that, please open a support request. We can send you a link and you can check out the library of imagery that we have there. And then picturegeorgia.org, I think is what it is. This is a website by the Georgia Department of Economic Development, and they have a whole collection of photos that were actually taken in Georgia, showing different landscapes, showing people in different settings and doing different things. And so that can be a really good resource for getting, thank you, Yen, for getting photos that are actually in Georgia and probably more relevant to your content.
All right, thank you. So we have a couple questions about the font sizes and changes. So the first one is, what is the heading font? I think.
Yeah, the heading font, the serif is Source Serif Pro, and that's another one that is free to use. That one, I believe both of our fonts are also variable fonts, which, to give a quick explanation of that, that means that it reduces file size because it doesn't, a standard font is going to give you like multiple files for regular weight versus bold weight versus italic, all the different styles, whereas a variable font, it's just one file with like added logic of how that adjusts for weight and slant. And so by using that, we're reducing the file size, and it also gives us more nitpicky variability in terms of like what the weight is at different spots. So I just wanted to throw that out there, but Source Serif Pro for the serif font and Montserrat for the sans serif.
Alrighty, thank you. And then some questions about like font size. So one person wants to know if you'll be able to change the font size. And can you just explain a little bit about why we made changes to the fonts this time?
Yeah. So let me see. I'll just get us back on a typography page. Okay. So as far as like adjusting the font size, it's really going to depend on what the content is that you're using. We currently are offering just one theme across all sites, and there's like it is set. So if you have a heading level 2, then this is what that's going to look like. And there's no sort of selection in that. And we see that as a benefit because we don't want to have too much variability from one site to the next or one page to the next, and just making sure that everything is sort of done for a reason. Now, there are different ways that you can make your content stand out. So if you want to have like one sentence in the middle stand out and be bigger, but it's not technically a heading, then I don't have any screenshots in this presentation, but we do have the option for block quote. And so there are 2 different design treatments for that. Sorry for not having visuals here. There are 2 different design treatments for that. One where it has quote marks around it if you are actually using it as a quote, but then we also have a version called call out. And so that gives you larger text, and it gives you like a little border on the left side to help it stand out, but it doesn't make it technically a heading. So headings within text are used for more than just visual style. It's a big accessibility thing, it's a usability thing, it affects your search engine optimization. So we want to make sure that we're always using headings properly and using it to create an outline for the page and introduce sections of content. But we do still have some of those different ways to call out text differently. Another example of, let me see, how that, somewhere around here, of how you have different options for font sizes. So like this one, for example, this is the spotlight block. And so it gives you just bigger text. It helps it stand out differently if you're on a landing page. Similarly, if you're looking at embedding content onto something like a topic page, let me see, then there are different, I'll just keep, sorry for this. Almost there. Here we go. So if you embed something, then again, that's another way that you can help things stand out differently and create more variation to the way that your content is coming together. But as far as like the individual level, there's not the option to change like, oh, I want this text to be point size 14 or whatever. Does that cover it?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool.
Okay, can agency logos be placed in the header?
Yes. Yeah, that's not something that I had any examples of here. I probably should have included that, but it would show up similar to how it does currently. So the way that we have it right now is that your logo will show up right here, and then this word mark will just push to the right. And so that's the same way that it's going to show up here. Your logo will be right here and the word work will be to the right of it. You can see, of course, we now have a white background in this header area as opposed to a dark background. And I think actually for the most part, that is going to work better with your logos. Normally I've seen logos sort of designed to be used on a light background. And so this is going to be, this will let us use that version of the logo. And we've been working with different agencies specifically to make sure that we have a good version of the logo that's going to work in this updated header.
Thank you. Okay, so with linked teaser images, can we use the same photo for a different linked teaser or tile? Like both of them be published simultaneously?
So talking about this thing here?
I think so.
Yeah, it's not going to function any differently from your perspective as an editor. Just like the way that it is currently, whenever you add an image to your site, it's now in your media library on the site. And so you can reuse that image across different places. I mean, of course, like be conscious of the decisions that you're making in terms of how to reuse that image. You don't want to have something in one place and then reuse that image somewhere else that is like a totally different topic that can, like we want to use it in a way that if it shows in one place, now that image is associated in the user's mind with that topic. And so if you reuse it, then maybe this photo is like the hero image at the top of that page when you click on it. So just creating the associations from one to the next. But yeah, as far as how you actually go about doing that, technically it's not going to change.
Thank you. All right. Will certain elements like icon lists have an option to change or disable the preset border or background colors? For example, the colored trims at the top of the lists and text blocks.
Top of lists or text blocks. Are you talking about with that one, like the accent color that was like in a bar across the top?
Possibly.
Okay. Let me find. Okay, so if this is what we're talking about here, and let us know in the Q&A or in the chat if this is what you're asking. But having this color across the top here, yes, okay, this is what he's talking about. Okay, so the color itself can't be changed. That is determined by the palette of your site, but whether or not it shows is going to be partially up to you as the editor. It depends on where you're doing it. So and let me see if, I don't remember if I had any examples of this on a landing page. Okay. There it is. So like right here, if you're familiar with editing landing pages, when you place a block, you can put it in a card. And so that's what this is. It gives you that accent line across the top. The way that we have it currently is that it also gives you like a light background color. And with this update, we're swapping that so that it always is white and has, hopefully this shows up for you in the screen share. If you don't see it now, I promise you'll see it once you're actually looking at the site. But there's a slight drop shadow to kind of call out the card and make it show up as a block. So that's how you get that there. If you don't want to have that accent color across the top, then you can just not put it in a card and then it'll just show up as text just straight on the page. So that'll get rid of the color there. Also, even if you have it in a card, if there's an image associated with it, then the way that we are handling it in this design update is that instead of the accent color on the top, it's going to have the image. So it's kind of an either or situation there. Now, when it's embedded into a WYSIWYG, then if you embed it to the right or the left and it does not have an image, or I guess even if it does have an image, then it still shows in the card display. If it does have an image, then it just doesn't have the accent color across the top. But of course, you can always embed it full width, and at that point, like I was saying earlier, it's just straight on the page. It just has a little bit of space on the top and the bottom. So there are still some things that you can do there to sort of control when it shows up in the card, but we don't have that flexibility for on like a instance by instance basis where you can choose what that color is going to be. That's really determined by your color palette.
Thank you. Can tiles be vertical?
Vertical. So I'm trying to figure out what that might mean. So this is the layout. The way I'm showing it here, this is one set and they're all listed out horizontally. This is one set, they're all listed out horizontally. If this is placed in a narrower portion of the page, or if you're looking at it on a mobile device, they will stack on top of each other and lay out a little bit differently there. But in terms of, well, and then even like the tile itself, when this sort of tile gets into a smaller space, a narrower space, it will adjust how it displays. So like in some instances, the image might show up to the left and the text to the right. So things are going to adjust as appropriate depending on where it's placed. I hope that answers that.
All right, thank you. Just a few more. So, okay, for section backgrounds,
yeah.
Small title, etc., the background images are limited to presets with no options to upload your own. Will there be an option to upload your own background images for sections, small tiles, maybe, etc.?
Okay, I'm not sure what it's talking about, the small tiles. The background images, because of what they are and the fact that it is this giant image, and just making sure that we're using it appropriately, that is something that is still going to be going through development. We don't have that built out for individual editors to be able to add background images. There have been a few instances where an agency needs to have a specific background image. And in that sort of case, you can open a support request and we'll work with you to make sure that what we're using is going to look right with the content in the section, and also optimize that image to work well for the space. So a concern with those images is that either it's not going to be a high enough resolution, and when it shows up so large, it's going to be blurry or pixelated, or on the other end, it's going to be such a large image that now the file size is huge and that's going to impact performance. So those are just some reasons why we want to make sure to always take an extra step before adding that option. We are taking a fresh look at the background images that we offer across all of GovHub and making sure that all the options that we have are good. I don't have any, again, examples in this slide deck, but we have been working on how to what that's going to look like when you have a background image on a section. All in all, it's going to be pretty similar for now to what we have in Forest, but there are some ways where certain background images, maybe it makes more sense to use a different photo. That's only going to be in a few small cases. For the most part, they're going to stay the same as what they are now, and that's something that we're always looking at and seeing if we need to add any more options.
Okay, and there was a note to the small title. Small title is a checkbox in the section config, I believe.
Right. Okay, so yeah, so that option is actually going away with this update. That's one of those things that as we were going through and figuring out what can we clean up and just simplify for editors, we didn't see it being used a whole lot. I know that there are a couple of places out there where it's been used, but we're looking at removing that. And yeah, just seeing how we can make that section configuration as straightforward as possible, because there's already a lot going on there. And especially with the new featured intro section, we just wanted to streamline that and keep it straightforward.
All right, thanks. We have 2 questions left and only 4 minutes, so I want to try to get to these 2. And then if you do have more questions, we're happy to answer them. If you send them through support, we're happy to answer follow-up questions. But this one is, is there a difference in between two themes from text to speech recognition perspective?
So if you're using like a screen reader type of thing,
Between themes? I don't think so.
I don't think so. I mean, the only thing I can think of that would be impacted is like just the small accessibility fixes that we're taking. So like when I was talking about the navigation, rebuilding how that works from an accessibility standpoint. I'm not the person to necessarily get into details about that. I do know that like whatever it is that we're doing, we're making sure that it is fully accessible and going to be useful for people who use screen readers. But all in all, it should pretty much follow the same structure as we use now. Jasmine left a comment about that in the, oh, sorry, that was just to us. So Jasmine left a comment saying the new Bloom theme is based on an accessible code framework and should be no difference in that aspect. Okay, so yeah, already our current theme is taking that into consideration. So any small tweaks that happen are just kind of part of our standard day-to-day.
All right, and our final question is, will it be easier to move around embedded cards on the page in the editor? Currently, wrapping text content around the cards is a challenge for getting the page to look cohesive. Also, depending on the size of the cards, it could create extra line breaks and spaces in between paragraphs. Is that going to be easier?
Gotcha. Currently, that's not something that we've looked at yet. I know that we do have that on our backlog to consider how things like embeds work in the WYSIWYG. But that's not something that is going to go into effect with the theme update. Yeah, for that sort of thing, I know it's a pain. I would just recommend like always save it as a draft and take a look at what it looks like on your published page or on the live page before you publish it. But yeah, that's definitely one of those things that we have in our backlog to get into in the future.
All right, Rachel, well, that's it for now.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Cool.
I believe that we'll be sending out a wrap-up email that'll include the slide deck from today, and we'll also be posting a recording of this on our YouTube page, so we'll send out a link to that. And I think Yen just put in the chat our support link, so in case you do have questions or follow up about anything, please send us a note there. We're happy to answer additional questions from there. So everybody have a good afternoon. Thank you, Rachel.